Family and lucha libre, two things that make up the very fabric of professional wrestling. And when you put the two of them together, well, there's one name that seems to rise above most. And it's a family name that just so happens to be the topic of this episode. Because today... Thank you to Cool Ass Jack and Inigo Montoya and all of my other Patreon supporters for all the help during these times. Now, if you want to get your own Patreon shout out, then please sign up over on my Patreon page. And if you just want to support the channel, well, give this video a big like and please make sure that you're subscribed. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into the video. The Guerrero family is easily one of the most important wrestling families in all of wrestling history, as their influence has ranged all the way from Mexico to the United States to even Japan. And so, in order to cover this family properly, well, why don't we just start at the beginning? Born Salvador Guerrero Quesada in 1921, Arizona, the person who would one day be known as Gory Guerrero would move to Mexico at the age of 9, where his father would work as an interpreter in Guadalajara. From there, Gory would join a gym looking to learn boxing, but instead would be taught the art of lucha libre, wrestling his first match in September of 1937. After this, he would begin wrestling under the name Joe Morgan, until changing it to Gory Guerrero, in reference to his reputation for having bloody matches. Then, 6 years later, after his debut, he would begin to work for EMLL, where he would be named Rookie of the Year, and would go on to win the Mexican National Welterweight Championship, and later the Mexican National Middleweight Championship. Furthermore, as a pioneer of lucha libre himself, Gory would get to tag with the legendary El Santo, as well as making appearances in some of his films. And that wasn't the only legend that Gory would get to tangle with, as he also got a chance to compete for the NWA World Championship against Lou Thesz, although he would not win. Oh, and he would also have a feud with Enrique Yanez, a name that we will be getting more into in just a little bit. Anyway, Gory would leave the EMLL in 1966 and then start working with Dory Funk Sr. He would also begin running shows and booking for both NWA Hollywood and World Class Championship Wrestling. He is also credited as the inventor of La de a Caballo, or the one on horseback, better known today as the Camel Clutch, as well as the Gory Special and all of its variations such as the Gory Bomb, the Gory Driver, and the Gory Cradle, just to name a few. Oh, and allow me to apologize for my poor pronunciation on any of the Spanish you might hear in this video. Gory would retire in the 1980s, but he would keep busy by selling auto insurance as well as opening up his home to train future wrestlers. Now, going back to Enrique Yanez, while the two men feuded in the ring, they would become family outside of it, as Gory married Enrique's sister Herlinda, and together they would have 6 children, the oldest of which is none other than Salvador Guerrero III, or Chavo Guerrero, or Chavo Sr., or Chavo Classic. Chavo would begin wrestling in the NWA Western States before the family moved from Texas to California for NWA Hollywood, where he would feud with Roddy Piper for the America's Heavyweight Championship, a title that he would ultimately win 15 times. In addition to this, he would also get to feud with Atsushi Onita, as Chavo would find himself wrestling all over the globe, including spending time in All Japan. But these were not the only major promotions that Chavo would get to work for, as he also feuded with Gino Hernandez in Mid-South Wrestling, as well as entering tag team feuds with both the Rock and Roll Express and the Fabulous Ones after he began teaming with his brother Hector in Championship Wrestling from Florida. But of course, first, in 1976, Chavo would team up with his father Gory, and the two of them would be the first Guerreros to officially team up. Eventually, they would win the NWA's America's Championship. Chavo also wrestled for the AWA, the CWF, and the EMLL, among many others. And in his later years, he would become a prominent figure on WWE TV, known to many as Chavo Classic. And after that, he would begin appearing for Lucha Underground. Next, the second oldest son of the Guerrero family is Armando Guerrero Yanez, better known to many as Mondo. He began wrestling around the same time as his brother Chavo, pretty much following a very similar career path. That is until 1980, where he would wrestle for New Japan Pro Wrestling. But he would also get to spend time with his brothers in the AWA, feuding with Bad Company. Additionally, he would also wrestle for the UWA, the EMLL, and even wrestled as El Psicopata in AAA. Plus, he was a trainer for the original Glow. Although, speaking of shows, he would also get to work as a stuntman in major motion pictures as a result of meeting Gene LaBelle, which he did while wrestling for Gene's brother Mike. Next, on to the third son of the family, Hector Manuel Guerrero Yanez. Like his brother Mondo, was born in Mexico City, but he spent much of his time as a youth in El Paso, Texas, where his oldest and youngest brothers were born. Hector would begin wrestling in 1973, where he would primarily be working with his two older brothers. After that, he would get to wrestle for Jim Crockett Promotions as the masked wrestler Lasertron, which somehow isn't the worst costume that Hector has ever had to wear, as he was also the gobbledygooker in the WWF, featured during the 1990 Survivor Series, as well as again during WrestleMania 17. And yes, it was Hector wearing that costume again for that match too. Hector has also wrestled for Smoky Mountain Wrestling, ECW, the AWA Mid-South, and in Japan before eventually arriving in WCW, where he would go against his younger brother, although he would leave the company quickly afterwards as he did not feel happy about how he was being treated. Then in 2007, Hector would join TNA as the Spanish color commentator as well as the manager of LAX. Now, going back to Chavo Sr., well, obviously enough, he had a son, Chavo Jr., who was also born as Salvador Guerrero in El Paso, Texas. But one advantage that Jr. had was, as mentioned earlier, Gory's home had become a training ground, with a wrestling ring in the backyard, where Chavo would make great use of this, training alongside his youngest uncle, who was only 3 years older than him. Chavo would begin to wrestle in Mexico before touring Japan and even getting to compete in the Best of the Super Juniors tournament. Then in 1996, he would wrestle for WCW, getting the opportunity to wrestle against Ric Flair during one of his early matches for the company, although his time there is probably most known for his work with his uncle, including the Latino World Order storyline and when he was driven mad by his uncle and became obsessed with a toy horse named Pepe. But after Uncle Eddie left for the WWF alongside the other Radicals, Chavo remained in WCW, where audiences would get to see what he could do on his own. And while he did win some gold during his time in World Championship Wrestling, including the tag titles with Lash LaRue and 2 runs with the Cruiserweight belt, it's what Chavo would do after WCW that would make a much bigger impression and all the difference amongst many fans. Recently, like his uncle Mondo, Chavo would work as a trainer for the show Glow, but this time it would be the Netflix version, and he would also get to appear in the show as well. And in addition, he would get a stint in Lucha Underground and AEW. But going back to the purchase of WCW by WWE, Chavo's contract was picked up immediately. At first, he spent his time on the undercard before eventually joining back up again with his uncle to form Los Guerreros. But before we get into that, let's get into some other family members first. For you see, Uncle Eddie had a daughter, Shawn Guerrero, who, under the name Raquel Diaz, would wrestle for WWE, originally starting out in Florida Championship Wrestling, the promotion that would eventually become NXT. Then, after leaving, she would get engaged to her fellow wrestler and NXT alum, Aiden English. The two would get married in 2016, and following that, Shaw would eventually get to make an appearance for AEW in 2020. Oh, but excuse me, let's not forget about Shaw's mother, Vicky Guerrero, who was also Eddie's wife. But that leads us to... Now, on to the most famous member of the Guerrero family, Eduardo "Gory" Guerrero, better known to everyone as Eddie Guerrero. Eddie was born in El Paso, Texas, and he attended the University of New Mexico and New Mexico Highlands University on an athletic scholarship, developing his skills as a collegiate wrestler before moving to Mexico to hone his practices as a professional. From there, he would work for the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, which was now rebranded as the Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre, and he would do so under a mask with the name of Mascara Mágica. However, after leaving AAA, it's important to note that his mask gimmick would still belong to CMLL, so therefore Eddie decided to unmask publicly right then and there, making him the first luchador to ever do so. However, this break from tradition met with a volatile reaction. During this time, Eddie would wrestle for both New Japan and AAA, and he would also get to win the Best of the Super Juniors tournament in 1996. Meanwhile, in AAA, Eddie would form a tag team with El Hijo de Santo, forming a new version of La Parija Atómica, which was originally the team name for Santo and Gory. Although this tag team would be short-lived, as Eddie would turn on the son of Santo and instead aligned himself with Art Barr, who would be the inspiration for Eddie using the Frog Splash. Now, as this was happening, the two would get the notice of one Paul Heyman, which led to Eddie joining ECW in 1995. Eddie wouldn't be with the Extreme brand for very long, as he soon signed with WCW, who he already briefly wrestled for back in 1989 and in 1991. But now, after his epic rivalry with Dean Malenko in ECW over the television championship, he would return to World Championship Wrestling as a star, getting to once again compete against New Japan wrestlers, but this time he would get to do it representing WCW in the Starrcade World Cup of Wrestling in 1995. Following Starrcade, he would then win the United States Championship by defeating Diamond Dallas Page in a tournament for the then vacated title. This was followed up by Eddie entering the Cruiserweight division, where he would feud with the likes of Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, and of course Dean Malenko. Then, afterwards, Eddie would form the aforementioned LWO, and subsequently the stable known as the Filthy Animals. And as previously mentioned, he alongside the other radicals of Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko, Eddie would leave WCW for the WWF, and there he would quickly find success, as Eddie would win both the European and the Intercontinental Championships within his first year in the company. During this time, he would enter a program with China, and he would begin developing some of the more classic Eddie shtick that we would all come to know and love today. Then, after being away from the WWF for a short amount of time, he would return later in 2002, and began a rivalry with Rob Van Dam over the Intercontinental title. After that came the already discussed team of Los Guerreros with his nephew Chavo, who would win the SmackDown titles at the Survivor Series 2002. However, Chavo would be put on the shelf in 2003 after a bicep injury, leaving Eddie to rejoin singles competition, where he would win the United States Championship yet again, but this time for WWE. Then, upon Chavo's return, the two would recapture the tag titles, making Eddie a double champion. Following this, Chavo would turn on Eddie, breaking the group up, and as a once again solo act, Eddie would get the chance to compete in a 15-man Royal Rumble on SmackDown to determine the #1 contender, a match which Eddie won. This led to him earning his shocking upset victory over none other than Brock Lesnar to become WWE Champion, followed by his famous celebration with Chris Benoit at the end of WrestleMania 20 after he retained over Kurt Angle. And then in 2005, Eddie would be involved in his well-known feud with Rey Mysterio, where in kayfabe it was revealed that Rey's son Dominic was secretly Eddie's son, making Dominic, storyline-wise, a Guerrero, but only in storyline. Well, there you go, the history of the Guerrero family. But what are some of your favorite Guerrero moments? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that your notifications are on, and if you could, please give this video a like. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.